let's go ahead and make sure that everybody's clear on the story in books 16 through, or book 16 and book 22. So I'll tell it very briefly, and if you have any questions about this, please feel free to raise your hands. So 15 books have passed since Achilles first suffered his wounded pride, and he's been sitting in his tent fuming, not really taking part in anything. He is not returning home, and he is not entering the battlefield. He is a man in stasis. And this is very important, that Achilles can't seem to act one way or another. He can't seem to make up his mind. All he's doing is removing himself, but not really committing to anything. Now, after 15 books of battle, and the tide of war turning to both sides, Achilles is becoming a little bit antsy. He's a little bit impatient. He wants to fight, but he also wants to observe his wounded pride. So, instead, he decides that his best friend and a very powerful warrior, as you determined after reading page after page of dead Trojans, Patroclus is sent in his stead to command the Myrmidons, Achilles' fighting men from Phthia, and to wear Achilles' armor, so that the men on the battlefield believe it is Achilles. And Achilles hopes, well, this will strike fear into the hearts of the Trojans and allow Patroclus to win through. So Achilles is fighting without fighting. He still hasn't made a firm commitment to doing anything. But he's very antsy to get into battle, and he's also afraid because Hector has reached the Achaean ships, and he is burning them. And this, of course, could cut off the escape route for the Achaeans. So Patroclus enters battle with the Myrmidons, slays scores of Trojans, as you read, once again, for pages, finally reaches Hector, and Hector, with the assistance of others, kills Patroclus, strips him of his armor, and cries victory. Achilles becomes even more enraged, goes over the top, and decides to enter the battle now because he's forgotten about his wounded pride. He's forgotten about the insult of Agamemnon, and he's now focused on one and only one thing. What is that? Revenge. Absolutely. Revenge over every other consideration. You must realize that in these wars, revenge wasn't really a motivation. Emotion wasn't so much of a motivation. They quite often obeyed very strict rules, gentlemen's rules of war engagement. And they quite often left their own enraged emotions out of it. Well, Achilles is doing something else. So Achilles enters the battlefield, starts killing Trojans, drives them back, and most of them enter the walls of Troy, except for Hector. Hector decides that he will face Achilles. So Hector stands outside the walls of Troy alone. Achilles runs up. Hector sees him running up and does what? Runs away. Runs around the walls of Troy several times until he finally turns to face this terrible man, faces him in battle, and before battling him, asks one favor of Achilles. And what is that? Don't destroy my body. Don't leave it for the dogs, for the birds to peck at. Give my body back to my father. Hey, guess what, Achilles? He'll pay a handsome ransom for it. By all accounts, this was common in Greek warfare at this time, that if a body was taken, that body would be sold back. The body's not really treasure. You can't get anything from it, except you could sell it for treasure. So, standard rule of warfare, you sell this body back. Anybody know why that would be important to the Greeks at this point? What would the funerals do?
Well, send them off to the gods.
Send them off to the underworld. And if they do not have a proper funeral with the funeral rites, that means that their soul wanders aimlessly around the earth, never finding rest. So this had a very important religious significance. Hector is basically saying, you can kill me, but please stop there. And Achilles says, no, I will kill you, and then I will desecrate your corpse, and I will keep torturing you until I can no longer torture you. He is so consumed with revenge. Hector realizes who he's facing, dies anyway, and Achilles takes the body, pierces it through the tendons, wraps rope through the holes, ties it to his chariot, and starts maniacally driving around outside the walls of Troy, dragging Hector's body, as Hector's father and mother, names? Priam and Hecuba. Oh. That's correct. Priam and Hecuba watch helplessly, overwhelmed by grief. And of course, Hector's wife, Andromache, is inside the walls of Troy, and she thinks she hears something and can surmise what has happened. And that's where we're left, with Achilles, a maniacal nut, driving around in his probably super fast chariot, dragging Hector around, and of course, weeping and fuming at the death of his friend Patroclus. Questions? Andy?
Did anything major happen between book 16 and 22?
The funeral for Patroclus, I believe. They were having funeral games for Patroclus, so they paused for a while to have those funeral games that we have discussed to be very similar to the Olympic Games. That, by the way, oh yeah, funeral games. It's like a big party, you know? Hey, let's send this guy off, right? Send him off to the underworld. Let's have some games. Let's throw some treasure into a big pot, and we'll have running races, and whoever wins the running race gets to take something from the big pot. Gives Homer an opportunity, by the way, not only to throw an urn on the pot, but to tell the entire history of that urn, which you guys would love to read, I'm sure. Other questions? Okay, then let's